Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very accomplished seenager professional and an author from Hyderabad, India, Neerja Singh. Neerja, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Ashutosh. Thank you. I'm thrilled.
Thank you. Neerja is a global convention speaker. She's an author and she's a generational collaborator. She's also a generational diversity speaker and author of 4 generational books and a columnist on staying a step ahead of Gen Next. Neerja Singh, in her own words, is the seenager or a senior teenager. So Neerja, you call yourself a seenager. Can you explain the concept of a seenager or a senior teenager?
That's right, Ashutosh. I call myself a seenager because I'm a senior teenager. And I call myself also a millennial with the benefit of hindsight. I chose this moniker because it helped me bridge the gap between generations.
Yeah.
And I do believe I'm also a teenager because I'm a shape shifter like the younger generations. I'm ambitious like them, tech savvy like them, and entrepreneurial in my temperament, just like them.
Oh, wonderful.
And yes.
So before I go further, tell me a little bit about your own journey and when did you first get interested in generational diversity?
And look, Ashutosh, I was being like any regular mom and professional born in the 60s. I was being a textbook parent, I thought, and a textbook professional. I have a background in education and media, but what I was seeing was that the outcomes were not turning out textbook. And there were things catching me completely by surprise. And it was, in fact, my older daughter who lit the fire of generational diversity under me, because she was coming out of one closet after another. She had studied in premium schools. She was a graduate of the National Law School of India, University, Bangalore. Then she did her master's in psychology at the Ambedkar University and also worked with Google Hong Kong. And after all of that, she was struggling with a quarter life crisis. She was coming down with mental health issues. And you're a president student council, you're a Delhi state boxing champion, and yet, Ashutosh, we lost her in 2021 to suicide. And I shared this very openly because I learned from my daughter Aksir to claim these labels also. She is the reason I began to talk on generational diversity, because I saw that this is like a never before difference. We haven't seen this kind of disconnectedness before.
Very, very well said. So carrying on, and thank you so much for sharing the story about your daughter. What, in your view, are some of the common misconceptions we tend to have? And you said you were born in the 60s, I was born in the 50s. So what are some of the common misconceptions people have about different generations?
So, Ashutosh, your generational location will be very different from my generational location. So, my location is the 1960s, Chinese aggression, the Indo-Pak War, the Sabre jets. I ended up marrying a fighter pilot. That's a different story. I was completely taken up with these NAT pilots back then putting the brown paper on our, windows, blackout, and all those things. Now, the misconception today is not so much as these have become minor factors. The misconception is about the entire idea of generational diversity today. We do not acknowledge how different this generational diversity is. And the difference is not just about music, about lifestyle, about none of this. It goes far deeper. It has to do with power, the structure of hierarchy. It has to do with politics. It has to do with language. That is the misconception, because, and this is happening at both sides of the age spectrum. So employees are living longer, they continue to work, and the power is moving younger. So Today, it's not just good old plain intelligence that you and I talk about.
Mm.
There is your digital intelligence, there's your emotional intelligence, there's your social intelligence. And we are really beginning to live in niches,
Mm.
very narrow niches,
Mm.
which sometimes makes it possible to continue living without really connecting with each other.
Mm.
We have maybe begun to feel that generations don't need each other
Mm.
anymore.
Mm.
That's the misconception. The misconception, like I said, is about the nature of this generational
Very
diversity.
well said. Thank you. And conversely, what are some of the positive attributes that you notice when you talk about different generations?
Absolutely. They each bring very strong strengths. So, boomers, my generation, 1960s born, will bring, emotional intelligence to a situation. They can be great life coaches for the younger generations.
Mm.
They also can anticipate pitfalls.
Mm.
Whereas the next generation, 1960s, 64, 65 born Gen X, they are more pragmatic. They are also called the latchkey children
Mhm.
and very resourceful. Millennials, they brought tech savviness, optimism, connectedness.
Mm.
And then you have the Gen Z today, extremely cause oriented,
Mm.
social media savvy, hacker mindset. So these are positives. Each generation brings their own strengths. The challenge is to bring them all to the common table, a middle ground, so to say.
Well said. And moving from here, now I wanted to get your perspective on how can businesses, and I see a lot of corporate leaders struggling with trying to handle the younger, with the millennials and the Gen Zs, and the Gen Alpha is now coming in soon into the
Absolutely.
workplace as well. How can businesses benefit from understanding generational diversity?
There is no choice, Ashutosh. Today, we have to be age smart as well as age savvy. And because our collective emotional, mental, financial, social health all depends upon how generational ready we are.
Mhm.
And businesses, obviously, they will benefit from retaining young people that they're losing right now. They benefit in terms of productivity, in terms of profit. There, there are multiple ways that they need to understand this diversity. They need to address it. And they all know that generational diversity is very important for innovation and creativity, for instance,
Mhm.
for reverse learning, reverse mentoring. But they also sometimes find generational diversity a headache instead of a help. They're going to grow faster, they're going to thrive and survive only when they address, acknowledge
Mm.
generational diversity.
Mm.
So generational skills have to be acquired.
Mm. Fascinating. And Neerja, how do you foresee the generational landscape changing over the years?
Hugely, it's going to be unrecognizable, I feel. Now, let's see. We talk about all these generations, but we ignore something that is already alive and it's looming ahead of us, and that's called the Generation V.
Mm.
Generation V is the generation virtual.
Mm.
It's very fascinating because although this generation is human, but it's developed around technologies and it's so immersively, fundamentally entrenched in technology that it affects. It'll affect, factors like day-to-day operations of businesses, automated processes,
Mm.
your communication, global business, and Ashutosh. It's not just generational virtual; it's also generation visual.
Mm.
This is the generation, and it's not age dependent. That's what's
Mhm.
fascinating about it.
Yeah.
So they're also consuming content and they are creating content. So there's a huge amounts of a massive percentage of content. I think 70% or so is being created by this generation V.
Mm.
So they are far more discerning. So virtual in these two ways, and finally in their behavior, attitudes, and interests. When people are online, they appear very similar. So this is an entirely new segment,
Mm.
not defined by age, not defined by their social classes, not defined by geography,
Mm.
no gender differentiation. What are they based on? Accomplishment, achievement, and increasing preference for the digital media.
Amazing. And since you just spoke a little bit about technology, my next question is, how has technology influenced generational diversity and interaction?
Technology, now imagine, we're talking of generational diversity today, but tomorrow's diversity is only going to grow. Today it is considered as an ethical issue. Tomorrow it will be absolutely compelling, compulsory, unavoidable. That is the only kind of diversity that you're going to be handling, because AI is here, cyborgs are here. Imagine a workforce where you have this additional diversity, and robotics, biotechnology, and a holographic workstation. Fancy yourself, Ashutosh, sitting on a table like that. So on one hand, you have this older generation that is refusing to retire, like you and me. And on the other side, there you have Gen Alpha. They've been on social media ever since they were born.
Correct.
So this is going to be a most diverse workforce brought about by technology. And there'll be equity issues, not just around gender. There'll be equity issues around non-conformity, maybe around not just visible disabilities, but disabilities that you cannot see. And underlying all of this is going to be your employee activism. That is the generational diversity of the future.
Fascinating. And do you see expectations of different generations from previous generations beginning to impact organizational development?
Absolutely, absolutely. Gen Z, for instance, they bring the kind of expectations to their workplace that their employees and their parents and their bosses are completely unprepared for. Because this is one generation that comes with a huge sense of agency and autonomy. And they are completely empowered by that phone that they carry. And they have live, moment-to-moment information of the world. That is news that is happening around them. So even as the boss is sharing something with them, they are also looking it up online and perhaps contesting it. So, and the expectations of fair play, the expectations of transparency, of an inclusivity, and just being more aware of social impact, actually delivering social impact. These are the expectations. They also bring expectations of just being recognized for who they are. Today's employee, Gen Z, will just stand in front of you. He'll not try to fit into any template that you're providing to him. He said, this is who I am. Do what you can, what you will with me.
Very interesting. Very interesting. But then given these very, very interesting diversities between generations, what is, in your opinion, is the most effective way for these generations to communicate with one another when they're all working in the same workplace?
Shut up and listen. I say shut up and listen, Ashutosh, because this is also the tagline of my late daughter, Aksir. She was a mental health activist and a therapist, and she would also say shut up and listen, basically advocate listening. So how can generations communicate with each other? I think they have to get off our high horse and be open to hearing each other in the context of context. So look for the context, be prepared to go behind the scenes, try and understand. You may not agree with what the other person is saying, but at the least, you know what has happened. So keeping that in mind, listening skills definitely, and empathy with each other, kindness with each other, because all of us right now do not know exactly what we are struggling with. And we are building the bridge as we are crossing it, let's say. Or are you crossing the bridge as you're building it? That's a way to put it, because things are changing so fast.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And I'm assuming your word, your phrase, shut up and listen, applies to all generations and not to teenagers alone.
Every generation, the only thing is, they say, Ashutosh, today it's not enough to hear each other. We are like foreigners. We are different cultures. So for one generation, it's important to actually learn the language of the other generation.
Right.
What do they mean by chilling? What do they mean by angst, existential angst, psychic pain? What is posting? Understand, go deeper. Don't be dismissive.
Right.
You cannot afford to dismiss any of this today, I believe.
Great response. Thank you. My next question is, and I've got 2 or 3 more questions that I want to talk a little bit about your books. What strategies can organizations use or employ to manage multi-generational teams in a context where the leader may be either a seenager or a leader may be a millennial?
So let's say it's called practicing the paradox. Strategies have to be based on this premise. Today, a leader cannot afford to be a guard dog. He has to be a guide dog because the employee is bringing everything to work. It's not just, it's not that you can shut the door and say, leave your personal problems outside. Your new employees are bringing the entire selves with their baggage, with their emotional issues. All of it is coming to work. So your strategies have to be based on these paradoxes. How does a boss be stubborn as well as open?
Right.
How does a boss be confident as well as practice humility? How does a boss become a teacher and a learner? So strategies create open spaces, create opportunities for an honest communication, which can bear the weight of honest self-disclosure. The young generations, their bullshit meter is extremely sensitive. It sniffs insincerity and bullshit, hypocrisy. Say one thing, mean another. They don't have the time for this. They're very quick to tune you out.
Very interesting.
So strategies, and a lot of companies are doing that. I did a session with Adidas India recently in Gurgaon, their head office. And so this is the best strategy, like I said, is just begin to address it and acknowledge it. Ashutosh, a lot of them are not acknowledging it as yet. And eventually include it in your diversity and inclusion mandate. So it has to go beyond gender, socioeconomic, ethnicity. This is a diversity that affects every one of us.
Very interesting. So one more question relating to generational diversity, and then I want to move to your books. How can we as society address the generational conflict and the miscommunication?
All of us, we want to break new ground. We understand that. But the only thing that can facilitate that is an open, safe space, what is being called more and more. So accepting of differences, doing away with biases and judgments, and allowing people to act and behave in a genuinely open way. That's not something the earlier generations have learned to do because their parents were politically incorrect. They were brought up with a sense of shame. I was brought up to, constantly be told that you are wheatish complexion, whatever that's supposed to be, wheatish complexion. Remember? That's how it was. But that doesn't hold water anymore. So we just have to prepare to be open. A boss, Ashutosh, final thing, a parent today, a mighty boss and a mighty parent today and a mighty society person is somebody who can permit a younger person to be at their worst sometimes in their presence. You have to be a parking station. Allow that overheated car to cool down.
Right. Very interesting. So now let me move to your books. You've written 4 books. Tell me about your books.
I've written 4 books. So No Time to Be Young is a book that it talks about, it brings intergenerational disconnect. I try to bring it out of the echo chambers where I believe it is still raging because people don't acknowledge that this generational diversity is far more visceral.
Mhm.
So I wrote it because I saw that there was estrangement happening around me. There were mental health issues happening around me because of generational lack of communication, and in extreme cases, there have been loss of life. I suffered that, Ashutosh.
Yeah.
So that's the first book, No Time to Be Young. I
Mhm.
called it No Time to Be Young.
Mhm.
Then I wrote about the Gen Z.
Mhm.
Gen Z has forced everybody else to conform to them, to
Mhm.
adapt to them. But what have they been shaped by? So, okay, Gen Z had to do with that. And then I wrote Silver Surfers for my generation, for the silvers, because of the changing grain globe, the demography, the market's changing because of that. I also wanted to channel the cult of youth. And the fourth book is Boomer Bites, Boomer Bites and Bummer Rights.
Mhm.
That I was making an attempt to help the younger generation see the world through a boomer's, what I called a bitter, funny lens.
Mhm.
And the attempt with all these books, and the fifth one is going to be out in Jan, Ashutosh, it's to create what I call generational benevolence.
Mhm.
That's the idea.
Fascinating. So I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out Neerja Singh's books. I'm going to check them out myself. And my last question to you, Neerja, and this is for thousands of people who will listen to our conversation.
Yes.
Based on your amazing understanding of different generations, and given the fact that 74% of my viewers and listeners are under 34, so millennials and Gen Zs, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want a lot of our viewers and listeners to take away? And, this would be in addition to the very powerful lesson you gave, which was shut up and listen.
I'll say these 3 lessons with a disclaimer. These
Mhm.
are the lessons for today.
Absolutely.
They may change tomorrow.
Yeah.
So the first thing is prepare to challenge the popular scripts that we see around us.
Mhm.
We are buying into these scripts without taking a step back and analyzing it closely.
Right.
Second lesson would be do all it takes to retain your sense of connection with the young. Whether it's as a boss or as a parent, connection is the most important today.
Yeah.
And the third one I would say is, this is for the younger generation, that they have to learn the value of the social contract. There is something called the social contract.
Yeah.
My generation was born into a community, and I was trying to find myself all my life. But here you are born quite independent, but you're trying to create a community for yourself. You do need other people, you do need society. You cannot be completely independent on an island. So essentially, these 3, Ashutosh.
Fascinating. And on that note, Neerja, and this absolutely incredible conversation I've had with you, and your 3 wonderful lessons: prepare to challenge the popular scripts. Second one you said was connection is most important. And third one you said was value of the social contract is important. And you're so right. There are social contracts that exist
Yes.
all around us. In every relationship, we can choose to ignore it, but we must be aware of it. Thank you so much for speaking to me about your own journey. Thank you for talking to me about so many different aspects of generational diversity, which I do believe is so critical in all our lives and going forward, because every 10, 12, 15 years, we're going to be getting one more member in the alphabet soup. We're already at Gen Alpha, and I'm sure we're starting with Beta and Gamma and so on. But thank you again for speaking to me, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for listening to the brand called You Videocast and Podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.